So heads up there. Okay. And it's 7:03. Looks like we have 20 people total, but 16 residents. So I think we'll get started. So I'm Councillor Glenn, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I wanted to start with some quick introductions. Besides me, from the city side, Catherine Musgrove is here from my office. Hi, Catherine. And Catherine works with me on all of our community casework and traffic safety files. We have Scott Muir, who's part of the city's traffic safety department. Hi, Scott. And Milad Abdelhassani, who is also part of the traffic safety team. And I've invited Scott and Milad. They're here to help answer any technical questions or questions about city safety policy and so on. So they're good resources to have as part of this meeting. And they focus on a number of wards in the community, including Stittsville. So they're specialists for Stittsville ward in particular. So tonight I've got a short presentation just to set up why we're here and what we're discussing. So I'll walk through that in a moment. And then we really want to spend the bulk of the time answering any questions you have, hearing any feedback you have. This is about hearing from you. So I want to make sure the bulk of the time is to let folks ask those questions, share any comments. And then just a bit of housekeeping for the Zoom meeting. If you can remain muted unless it's your turn to speak, and you can turn your camera on or turn your camera off. It's up to you. It's always nice to see faces, but up to you whether you want to put your camera on or off. And I think that's it. So I'm going to start my PowerPoint here. Just put a few slides together. So we're here tonight to talk about some proposed traffic calming measures for Lloydalex. So a bit of background. We've had a number of requests from residents on Lloydalex regarding safety, and there have been several road safety incidents over the past couple of years, and even going back beyond that. A speed study has been done recently on the street, and it determined that the 85th percentile speed, which is a measurement that the traffic team uses to measure on Lloydalex, is 51 kilometers an hour. So that's well above the 40 kilometer an hour limit, and certainly means it qualifies for traffic calming and other safety measures. So we set up this meeting and promoted it through my website and email newsletter, and dropped off some flyers or postcards as well, just to make sure residents on Lloydalex were aware. And through that communications, we've shared that the recommendation from city safety staff right now is the installation of 4 centerline flex stakes between Rothbourne and Echowoods, along with no parking zones that are adjacent to the flex stakes. The approximate cost for these measures are $6,700, and it would be implemented through our ward temporary traffic calming budget in a future year. I'm hoping we can fit that into the budget for 2024. We're trying to finalize that over the next few weeks. And this is a map that shows the location of the flex stakes. So these would be centerline flex stakes located south of Rothbourne Road and spread out over several locations. And then you can see, well, the flex stakes are indicated in the green. And then adjacent to those are no parking restrictions. And those are placed there so that there is sufficient room for vehicles to go around the flex stakes. If you had cars parked immediately adjacent to them in these locations, you would not have enough room for vehicles to pass. So that's why the no parking is recommended as part of that. And then on either end of this area, there would be these green traffic calm neighborhoods, which is part of city policy to indicate to motorists when they're entering the area that there is traffic calming in place. We've had not a lot of feedback so far from residents, but we have heard 3 distinct themes. One is a request for traffic calming north of Rothbourne in addition to south. So it's recommended south of the Rothbourne, and we've had a resident reach out and suggest it be north as well. We've had some questions about speed bumps that I'm sure we'll get into later on today. And then questions about the status of Carp Road. So it's not directly related to this, but obviously since it runs parallel to Lloydalex, it's of interest. And I could quickly address Carp Road, which is the city is completing a detailed design of the widening of Carp Road. So the plan is to widen it to 2 lanes in each direction. So going from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, along with sidewalk and pathway on both sides of the road. So the detailed design is being done now, and it is construction we expect will start in 2025. So I know it's been a long time, a long wait. We've been anxious to see this get started, and finally looks like it is in the relatively near future, thank goodness, which obviously will have an effect on some of the traffic patterns and cut-through traffic potentially that we're seeing on Rothbourne now. So that's all I wanted to do to set it up, because I do want to make sure we're hearing from residents here. So if you have a question, there's a few ways. You could type a question in the chat, and I'm going to try to look for questions and kind of ask on your behalf, and whether it's something I can answer or Scott or Milad can answer, we can do it that way. Or if you'd like to speak and say your question or say your comment, if you put your hand up, I'll look for any hands that go up, and then I'll ask you to unmute and share your comment directly. So either way, you can type it in the chat, or you can put your hand up if you wish to speak. Okay, so there is, 2 questions off the top. What about a stop sign at Echo Pond and Lloydalex? So that's the first question. Maybe I'll turn to Scott and just certainly that's a possibility, and there's an evaluation process that we would have to go through. Scott, can you give us just an overview of how a request for stop sign works? And I'm not sure if that intersection's been evaluated before at Lloydalex and Echo Pond.
Sure. So we have a warrant method for establishing always stop when it comes to looking at intersections for always stop control, and 3 of the factors are based on the traffic volume that we see at the intersection. So it looks at the major street, which would be Lloydalex, and then the minor street. So the vehicles entering the intersection combined from all legs from the 3-legged intersection. And then another factor is looking at how much volume is coming off the minor street, which would be Echo Pond. Those values have to achieve a certain threshold for it to start achieving points towards our warrant system. And knowing the area, Echo Pond would have very, very low traffic volume coming onto Lloydalex. We don't have a turning movement count to go off of, but we could certainly collect one to determine how the warrants would be achieved. But it is relatively low traffic volume compared to Lloydalex. Even Lloydalex, looking at the data that we have and the volume that we have along Lloydalex is not really that sufficient to warrant installing an always stop at the intersection. One thing that we do not consider when installing always stops is that we don't use stop signs as a means of traffic calming. They are a means of controlling traffic through the intersection and alternating traffic. They're not used for traffic calming because people tend to accelerate and make up for lost time if they're stopping at multiple stop signs where they don't feel that they're required to be stopping. And they're strictly, where we put them are strictly based on volume and proximity to certain pedestrian generators like schools and parks and playgrounds and things like that, where there's a high frequency of pedestrian volume as well across.
So we can check on that. I don't think a stop sign evaluation has been done at that intersection, but that can be a takeaway from this, just to double check on that. And if there's not, we can do an evaluation. But you're saying, Scott, because of the low volume off of Echo Pond, it's unlikely to qualify. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's very, very unlikely that it would, based on the volume. Typically, I can give you the threshold of vehicles where we start to see points evaluated towards the warrants, and the overall total intersection volume has to be at least 800 vehicles going through the intersection over an 8-hour period. So that's 100 vehicles per hour going through the intersection from any one of the approach. We do have a traffic count from Lloydalex, a speed count from Lloydalex, and over the study was done over 21 hours, and the total volume was 127 just on Lloydalex. So it would have to be around 800 for us to start to see points towards the warrant. And as you know, Echo Pond is maybe got about 10 to 15 houses on that little cluster off of Lloydalex. So it'd be very unlikely that it would achieve the warrants for an open stop.
Okay, well, we will add that to our action coming out of this meeting. Thank you for the question. There were a couple questions about speed bumps. I said we'd probably have questions about that. Why wouldn't this be a good option, particularly near the park? So speed bumps may actually be a good option here. The challenge around speed bumps is the price of the speed bumps themselves. This came up at our city council meeting today. One of my council colleagues last year, a speed bump cost over $12,000 on a street, believe it or not. Although we know they've also been done for as low as $4,000. So there's a range in price. And that's really what the challenge is that to properly do Lloydalex, you need multiple speed bumps. I'm thinking at least 3 or 4, probably similar to the flex stakes. And even at the low end, that's $12,000. And we have a city budget of $75,000 across all of Stittsville. And there's a number of streets that are ahead in the queue. So that's why staff have recommended these flex stakes as an interim option until we have a future year where we have more budget available. It's a thing where if you only do one speed bump, what we find is people speed up to that speed bump, slow down, and then speed up, but they end up going faster with that speed bump in the way if you don't put enough of them on the street. So you do have to do it properly, and unfortunately, the budget's a challenge. So I actually do think speed bumps might be good for Lloydalex because there's also the concern about cut-through traffic here, and speed bumps have I think they're best used when you have a combination of speed and concerns about cut through, because they do deter cut through traffic to some extent, and they do slow down vehicles. So I think it's something we will look at in a future year, but in the interim, I think we should have the flex stake option, which at least gives an interim solution to slow down cars. Scott, do you have anything else to add about speed bumps?
No, not really. The price, like the counselor said, is kind of varies on the factors for the road. It could be as low as $4,000, but if there is some drainage issues or other factors that maybe engineering factors that aren't considered, we look at them as a piece of asphalt that goes on the road, but we have to look at a bunch of different factors that go into the design of them, and that could escalate the price slightly, as much as 12,000. I'm sure that was pretty extreme what was needed there to get a speed hump in, but the price does vary, and it's they are effective for sure. They do have a good impact because they do. You have to physically slow your vehicle or you'll cause damage to your car. But like the counselor did say, they need to be put in succession. So it's not just one in the middle. It needs to be 3, possibly 4 along the segment. So people aren't accelerating to a high speed to get to the next bump or to get to the intersections.
I thought of another thing. I talk about budget and our challenges around budget. This year or in 2024, I will have $75,000 to address traffic and speeding issues around Stittsville. That's actually up from $60,000 in this year, 2023. And one of the reasons is the automated speed cameras, because the revenue from those goes back to city traffic safety initiatives. And so one of the things they've done with some of that is to increase the amount of money that ward councilors have. So we're actually seeing we're able to catch up on things. So things like street lights that are needed for safety, or or speed bumps or more substantial improvements to safety. That's the revenue is certainly helping with that. Anyhow, there's another question, JR, about north of Rothbourne. Says people are using Lloydalex as their personal freeway to get to the 417 by bypassing Carp Road. Yeah, certainly aware that there's a lot of concern about cut through. Scott, you mentioned you've done a speed study, but is there any way you measure cut through traffic on a street like this?
Yeah. So we had done it's called an origin destination study. So looking at the intersections entering into the community and the kind of where the direction or travel would be. For example, if vehicles are coming in off Carp Road and they're going down to get into the community to Kimpton. Ideally, their travel route would be to stay on Carp Road and go down until they hit Kimpton, the intersection with Kittiwake, turn and go into the community that way because they're staying on the collector roads and the arterial roads and not using a local road to cut through. So staff in our office had done a review earlier this year along Lloydalex and found that for the afternoon period that they were looking for anyone coming off of Carp Road, there were zero vehicles that made that movement in the 2 hours that they were there. So they didn't observe it. It is kind of an onerous task. We have to have some staff out there, but they did go and review it. And there were zero cars that made that movement to get to Kimpton into the community. There were vehicles obviously that came in off of Carp Road, but those vehicles were residents of the community. So they weren't cutting through. They were local traffic and they were coming into the community. But that's how we determine the level of cut through traffic is by physically observing the vehicle making a turning movement and where they're going. So we have people stationed at different areas and they're basically recording the license plate of the cars as they come in, and then we compare them to see if the time that they entered and the time that they exit to determine if they were actually cut through or if they were dropping somebody off or they had a legitimate reason to travel on the road.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Just going through the questions. Jamie asked about. Oh, sorry. Yes, Jamie asks, will work be done on Rothbourne to stop it from disintegrating and cause gravel buildup at the corner of Lloydalex and Rothbourne? It becomes quite concerning from a safety perspective. So I'm going to say Catherine will note that as a takeaway and ask the roads team, which is separate from the traffic safety team, but we can ask the roads team to have a look at that location, the intersection of Lloydalex and Rothbourne. So thank you, Jamie, for flagging that. Shannon asks, I think we partially answered this, but how do you determine the traffic volume? So I think, Scott, you mentioned it was a study over 21 hours, but is that human beings counting traffic or technology? Like what are the mechanics of how you determine the traffic volume?
So we have a couple of methods. One is we do a camera would be positioned at an intersection and it records vehicles going through. We typically only do those for 8 hours, but it's a camera that records the traffic and we send that information off to a company that processes that data and gives us traffic volume. So it'll tell us where that vehicle was, every vehicle coming from, where they were turning and going to, as well as pedestrians. But we also have another method, and it's a side fire radar unit. It's called an armadillo, and it basically is positioned on the side of the road. You wouldn't even know it was there. It's very non-intrusive. It's a little tiny box. Has no indication that it's actually collecting data, but it is just counting cars as they go up and down the road. It's counting them incoming and outgoing, so it's getting bi-directional traffic volume as well as traffic speeds.
Okay, Shannon, I hope that gives you a little bit more info about how they measure traffic volume. I see JR. JR, you have your hand up, so if you can unmute.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, my name's Jamie Roberts. So yeah, we live in the north end of Lloydalex, and what we find, and it's not just us, I know we've talked to neighbors whether they're here tonight or not, we find the traffic since Kimpton opened has drastically increased where they come down Lloydalex towards Rothbourne. They barely stop at the stop signs. This is a real hazard. The number of people that don't stop at their stop signs, people turning off of Rothbourne right onto Lloydalex, they don't stop. And then what they do is they gas it up and come down Lloydalex past us going northbound to get onto the 417 so that they don't have to do the Carp Road until it's the last road possible.
Okay, so north of Rothbourne. So yeah, we'll definitely note that and take that as a takeaway to see if we can perhaps get a design recommended for the north part of Lloydalex as well. So thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
There's a few people with similar questions on that. So initials are AS asking about the same thing. Calming measures going northward on Lloydalex. Question from Marie: how do we get vehicles to actually stop at Rothbourne and Lloydalex? So, Scott, maybe that's something as well. If there hasn't been, we'll add that as a takeaway. Checking on anything we can do around compliance for stopping at Rothbourne and Lloydalex. I don't know if you had any further comments on that, Scott.
Sure. So as I was kind of explaining earlier about the always stop review that we do, when there is low traffic volume at intersections, the tendency for vehicles to not comply with that stop sign is much higher. So vehicle traveling along Lloydalex very infrequently experiences a vehicle on Rothbourne coming to stop at that intersection or forcing them to stop, so that every day going through that same situation, that person subconsciously just decides, I'm going to roll through this because there's barely anybody there. I rarely frequent a car coming up to the intersection, so they just take liberty and they start running through the stop sign. Part of the reason why we don't put in, we try not to put in unwarranted stop signs, because they are a method of controlling the traffic at the intersection. And when the volume is high enough, the frequency is there and we get better compliance with the stop, that people are actually coming to a complete stop or near complete stop before they proceed through the intersection. Ideally, this is most likely probably repeat offenders. It's the same people that are driving through this intersection, either on their commute to work, possibly they live on the street, and they just take liberties of just driving through that intersection all the time. And they're most likely the same person doing it every day. So ideally, we try to encourage residents to contact Ottawa Police and report this. And more people that report it, the more likely that Ottawa Police will come out. The more people that put in these requests, they kind of work off a heat map type of system. So if they get a lot of requests or a lot of inquiries for the same intersection, they're more likely to send an officer out there more frequently to enforce that stop sign. So for anyone who's on the call, if you notice this and you can go on to the Ottawa Police website, maybe the counselor can share the link to their reporting tool, and file a complaint online. If you notice the vehicle description, driver description, make, model, color of vehicle, that's all useful information that the police can use to kind of target the offenders who are running through the stop sign and possibly change that behavior.
Thank you, Scott. Catherine, if you're able to find that link and drop it into the chat for folks, the direct link to the police report website. If not, it's something we share often in my email newsletter, so we'll try to get that online. We added what are called stop line flex stakes to Kimpton at Lloydalex this year, or was it last year? I was just trying to search my email because we actually did a sadly, this is not abnormal for stop signs in Ottawa and Ontario. Those flex line stop line flex stakes, pardon me, actually do increase compliance a little bit. But if you go to any stop sign in Stittsville, I will guarantee you the majority of drivers are not stopping. They're rolling through. And to me, it is one of the most frustrating things as a counselor, that the most basic, the 8-sided red sign that we know is a stop sign has such poor compliance. And I always say, like, it's not there to inconvenience people. It's there for safety, right? And it just amazes me, near school zones, near anywhere in the community, the number of people who just roll right through, sometimes at a really high speed. It's amazing. And we can add these flex stakes at the stop line to every intersection in Stittsville, but it comes at a considerable cost. And I think it's a pretty poor use of funds. But if that's what we need to do to improve safety, I mean, that's what we do try to look at. So totally agree, though, that there's a lot of issues with rolling stops or no stops at all. It's really concerning. I want to go to Benjamin with his hand up. If you can unmute Benjamin.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm Benjamin Siegel. We live on Stony Pond, which is just off Lloydalex. And my concern is more around, so our use of Lloydalex is a lot. We walk with our kid and with dog on Lloydalex. And my concern with I think the flex states are great. I think that's going to slow people down. My concern, it's going to push drivers even further to the side of the road, which already there's no sidewalk, there's no safe place for people to walk, really. And so I'm glad we're trying to slow down drivers, but I understand from some previous conversations that a sidewalk is not really in the cards in the near future on Lloydalex. But could we put some consideration into how will pedestrian safety around where those flex stakes are? Because we're not having parking there so that the drivers can go around the flex stakes, but that's just reducing the amount of space the pedestrians have to safely walk on the road, right?
Yes, and you're right. There's not any near-term plan for sidewalks along Lloydalex. Certainly not in the next 5 years, at least. Scott, this is something I know we've heard before with flex stakes on roads without sidewalks, but in terms of impact on pedestrian and cyclist safety, do you have any comments or advice on how that can be improved?
So we have a lot of these situations across the city where we have flex stakes and we have the parking signs up to narrow to kind of create that little bit of a tunnel so vehicles can pass on their side of the road, the right side of the road, through that flex stake without having to impede or go onto the other side of the road where a parked car might be, kind of narrowing it too much, depending on how far they park away from the road or the edge of the road. When it comes to pedestrians, I'll give you a similar example that's in Stittsville. We have Jonathan Pack, who has the same thing, flex stakes on the center of the road. It is quite a narrow cross section of asphalt, and it's very frequently used by people walking to and from school, kids walking to and from school, people walking their dogs. I actually drive up that road almost every day to take my kids to school. And I've experienced and viewed vehicles coming up with a pedestrian as they're approaching the flex stake, and generally people are pretty respectful of that. They will stop and allow the pedestrian to clear. Same with cyclists. People will stop or slow down their speed and wait for the cyclists to kind of continue through. On a citywide network, we haven't had a lot of complaints once this flex stakes have gone in around pedestrian safety and walking adjacent to them when a vehicle approaches. Generally, people are pretty respectful of those pedestrians and cyclists as they're on the road and on the shoulder of the road, possibly walking adjacent to them. So it's not really a concern that we've had at a network level from the city. So I don't know if that helps in any way kind of alleviate your concerns with it.
Yeah, I guess I'm not. I don't have experience with being on it, like walking on a road with the flex sticks. This was just sort of a preemptive concern of like we're decreasing the amount of space we already have. I'm glad to hear that on the network level there aren't concerns. That reassures me. Yeah.
It's they are temporary, and they're certainly not a perfect solution. We see sometimes drivers totally, if they see a cyclist or pedestrian walking on the right side of the road, some drivers will decide to zoom around on the left side of the flex stake. Like I've seen that a lot, which is not ideal. On the other hand, they do reduce speed, so there's the advantage there. The slower the speed, the safer it is for pedestrians and cyclists. But I mean, it is temporary until a more permanent solution could be installed, whether it's speed bumps or whether it's sidewalks someday, or another permanent, properly engineered. Like if we could go back, when was Lloydalex built? Probably the 90s, with most of the homes there, right? I wish we could go back in time and plan it the way we do today's subdivisions, which have a street like this would have a sidewalk at least on one side, if not two. But I obviously, well, in my city budget, I can't afford a time machine yet, but we do have a lot of catching up to do on road issues across Stittsville for sure. I see Linda's hand up. Linda, you can unmute.
Yeah. 2003 seems to be when we moved in, and we were among the first people on the street. My concern is the absolutely shocking speed that school buses do on the street and in the early morning, and they are not school buses full of children. They seem to be empty, so that they're using this as a way to go somewhere else. I'm not quite sure where they'd be coming from, because they're going toward Echowoods, and whether they go up and turn at the lights, I don't know. But at any rate, I just really am shocked at how fast these school buses go. And as people have mentioned, there are no sidewalks, and it seems dangerous to me. I did speak to our former counselor, so this has been going on for a long time, and he essentially said that you kind of have to go and take a picture and see them doing it to make a complaint, which of course I haven't done. But I don't know, because the school buses are from companies. Is there any kind of even just letter, like bulletin, to go to the companies telling them that they're to caution their drivers about their speed? Reminders?
Yeah. So, well, earlier we mentioned just in general for reporting speed and traffic concerns, contact police. But if it's for a school bus or an OC Transpo bus or a vehicle from, I don't know, Kavanaugh or Tomlinson that we see all the time, or a city vehicle, if you can identify the company in some way, let me know about it, because from time to time we do contact the companies, and usually they're quite happy to hear about drivers who may be operating in an unsafe manner, and they may not be able to identify the individual driver, but they'll send out a reminder to their employees. All the better if you can get an identification number off of a school bus or a commercial vehicle. I have a lot of concerns about delivery vehicles in the neighborhood. It's one thing if it's FedEx, often though these vehicles are unmarked, or they're private vehicles, or they're food delivery, and often they're moving through the community as quickly as possible. That's their objective. And I have a lot of concerns about that. That's a lot harder to track and enforce. So those would be appropriate for a police report. But yeah, if it's a public vehicle and it's an identifiable logo on the side, and even better if you can get the fleet number of that vehicle, we'd be happy to send a note into the originating company to let them know about community concerns. Thanks for raising that, Linda. There's some comments and questions. So I just want to note some of these here. Anita suggests a no right turn during morning rush hour from Kimpton to Lloydalex, and perhaps a no left turn from Carp onto Rothbourne during afternoon rush hour. So we'll note that as a takeaway. Shannon asks, is there not a type of plastic option for speed bumps? Scott, can you comment on that one?
Sure. This is dating years ago. We did try a vendor supplied us with a speed bump that we did test in Ottawa on a road it was actually in Canada to determine its effectiveness and how it worked and the installation and everything like that. But those temporary speed bumps, they're bolted into the ground, similar to the flex stakes. They're bolted and anchored into the ground, and the number of bolts required to put them in is pretty significant. And unfortunately, the climate that Ottawa has, we get a lot of freeze thaw conditions and wet snow, and then rapid freezing, and that obviously causes roads to deteriorate over time. And if you drill a bunch of holes in them, and then they fill with water and then they expand, they just deteriorate the road much quicker, which is also a form of traffic calming. But nobody seems to like potholes. But those are things that we have done in the past. We did attempt to try them, but it's something that it was just not feasible in our climate to use.
Okay, I'm thinking when you mentioned potholes, there's a street in Stittsville, Neil Avenue, that's near the McDonald's Plaza, and it was an awful shape. And I think we did a speed study there, and it had one of the lowest speeds in Stittsville, about 30 kilometers an hour. They recently repaved it over the summer, and we're going to go back in and do a speed study soon. And I'm really worried it's probably going to be a 50 kilometer an hour street, but yeah, potholes and snow can be a good traffic calmer, but they have some other downfalls. Thank you, Shannon, for that question. Gina notes that there is currently drainage issues from Rothbourne onto Lloydalex. So we had a previous comment about roadway deterioration there, so we would note that. And another resident mentions concern with after big rainfalls, gravel from Kodiak washes down to the corner of Lloydalex. So we will add that to our list of things to have our roads team investigate for cleanup. Thank you. I see Marie's hand is up. Marie, let's go to you. You can unmute.
Yes, it's her husband, Mike Shumluk.
Okay. Hi, Mike.
We're right on the corner. Good evening. Thanks for taking time out for us. Appreciate it. So we're right at the very bottom on the north end. So we're technically CARP, but we have full view from our living room of all the cars coming down Rothbourne, making their non-stops, or blowing through the stop signs either way, north-south on Lloydalex. The comment was more along, I guess a couple of our neighbors read my mind. When it does rain hard, you get that accumulation of all the gravel that washes down Rothbourne right at the very bottom. You know, so two comments on that. I think it's, I actually don't mind it when all the gravel accumulates, because it's kind of a calming measure itself for traffic. All the gravel, people do tend to slow down because then they're not getting chips on their car or what have you. So I find that it's actually effective, and I get a little bit upset whenever the city has to come and clean that up. Which, by the way, from you know, as a neighbor or as a citizen who watches this repeatedly, for city budget, you guys are coming in to clean up at that intersection. I don't know how many times throughout the summer. Yeah, I've witnessed it. I mean, last summer it must have been 5, 6, 7 times after these big rainfalls, which we seem to be having more frequently now. And they're wasting a lot of water, or I don't know if it's a good use of city resources to have people come out and clean that up. Whether you can do anything about that or not, it might be an expensive option to re-asphalt, I think, around Kodiak on both ends or both sides of Rothbourne. But just to bring it to your attention, you know, that something should be done, but if not, then maybe city crews shouldn't be out there, you know, 6, 7 times every single year cleaning up the exact same spot.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. We'll definitely check it out. And I wonder too, if it's when they do Carp Road, if it's something we can piggyback on that work to do something more permanent. But thank you for noting that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
There is a question from Robert. I'll read it out. He says, I believe a bunch of no parking signs along with flex stakes would not deter speedsters. And noting that he disagrees that 85% of the speedsters are not local, but in fact going to Kimpton and beyond. But Scott, in terms of effectiveness of flex stakes in lowering speeds, can you give any data on that?
Sure. So we're currently in the process of updating our metrics around how effective they are in different scenarios. So we've done a lot of analysis over the summer. We're not quite complete that kind of review of how effective they have been, but overall, installing these since I believe 2018, 2019 is when the flex stakes started to come in. We have collected a lot of data pre and post on a number of different streets across the city, and the speed reduction from pre-implementation to post-implementation drops at what the councillor had said, the 85th percentile, and that is the speed at which 85% of the drivers are driving at or below. So he mentioned on Lloydalex it was 51 for this segment of Lloydalex, south of Rothbourne to Kimpton. But we have seen a reduction in the range of about 3 to 7 kilometers an hour, depending on the context of the road. But they have had a pretty good impact. I would say 3 kilometers an hour is a pretty massive impact on how fast people drive. 7 is even greater. Ideally, we want people down to drive 40 or even lower than 40, especially given there's a park there. And young children living on the street, but they do have a pretty good impact on how fast people drive. It's the intrusion into their normal routine of driving down a road that they can straddle the center line, then now have to force them to move to the side of the road more and drive closer to the curb, and navigate through parked vehicles, which are also traffic calming measures. And then they have an object in the center of the road and they don't want to hit it, so it physically narrows them down, like visually, that creates like a tunnel, and it makes them feel uncomfortable. And we have had some pretty positive results with flex stakes across the city.
I was thinking of, while you were talking there, I thought of one that's very, very similar to this stretch of Lloydalex, and it's Jonathan Pack Street, which is off of Abbott, just west of Stittsville, Maine. It runs parallel to Stittsville, Maine. And we did that probably about 3 or 4 years ago and did a before and after. And very similar, because we had complaints about speed and cut through. And when we added flex stakes, the speed dropped by between 5 and 10 kilometers an hour, which was great. So it went from over 50 an hour to closer to 40. And we also stopped getting complaints about late night drag racers on that street once the flex stakes were in. And it's really similar because like Lloydalex, there's no sidewalk on either side. Now they have ditches on either side there, so it's a little bit different. But it was an older neighborhood street. So I would expect we'd see similar results on Lloydalex to what we saw on Jonathan Pack and other streets in the community. But I think it's a really good comparator. Thank you, Robert, for your question on that. Julie has a question. Is there a plan to add a right turning lane at the lights at Echowoods and Carp? And Julie, I'm going to ask you if you can send me an email about that, because I don't know off the top of my head, but it's possible that through the redesign or upgrade of Carp Road that there might be a lane configuration change there, because I know when they did the original environmental assessment for Carp Road, all of the major intersections had recommended upgrades to the intersections, and how the traffic lights and lane configurations would work so that that they were upgraded to meet the changing traffic patterns. So we can check on that. I just don't have the information handy tonight. Thank you, Julie. And Benjamin, if you can unmute, go ahead.
Yeah. You mentioned the park, which made me realize I just wanted to mention something just that I think forces more pedestrians onto Lloydalex, is that the path from that park on Lloydalex doesn't go anywhere. It should go somewhere, but it just like there's a section of path that goes over like the rocks there that is not really finished and kind of sketchy sometimes of year. And I think if that section was maybe just a little bit easier to navigate, a lot of pedestrians could instead use the trail instead of going onto the road, which might alleviate some of the concerns of the speeding cars. Just wanted to make sure that was noted.
Yes, I know exactly where you mean, and I was just trying to find because I'll try to find it before the end of this call, because we have been working on with city staff to find a solution. This was a massive miss on somebody's part when the whole Potter's Key subdivision was done. And I don't know why on earth they didn't find a way. Well, I have my suspicions as to why they didn't connect the pathway, and it has to do with stormwater management and cost and so on. But we are working with staff to find a solution. It's any way we do it is turning out to be rather expensive because of the implications on the stormwater pond. But I'll try to find the link where I've got some more info. The other one is that pathway that connects all the way up to Jackson Trails and Maple Grove Road, coming right off of Rothbourne. We'd also like to properly landscape that path so it's actually a usable link for cyclists and pedestrians in the future as well. So that's also something that is in the works, but all of these things are a little bit expensive, but we're working on it. And I'll try to find that link if we have some time before the end of the call. I'm glad you raised that though, because I think you're right. If people had a way to connect through between Lloydalex and Potter's Key, it'd be a great pedestrian link. And I know people do it informally now, but it's not a very accessible and sometimes not super safe way to pass through there. I thought I saw another hand go up and then it went down perhaps. I'm just going to try to find on my website here. I'm going to do a search for Echowoods and see if I can find that information. Oh, look at that. I found it. The unfinished pathway between Potter's Key and Echowoods. It's got a little bit of kind of the why and the what's possible. So I will share that in the chat. But if you don't see it in the chat, you can go to my website and search for Echowoods. And you'll see it there. This is where Zoom can be really handy to bring these things up. Anyways, there's a photo I took of the stormwater pond a few years ago on a close to sunset on a nice summer night. But it'd be nice to have more accessibility for that for sure. Anyways, I'm just going to look for any hands up because I think we've caught up on the questions in the chat. I also wanted to say we have not made any decision on next year's budget and implementation. I do think staff's recommendation is good to have, at least in this part of Lloydalex, this temporary measure until we're able to do something more permanent. We're definitely going to look at all of the suggestions tonight, but if you have any other feedback or if you're talking to neighbors and they have additional questions or feedback, please encourage them to email me or call my office, and we'd definitely like to hear from you. I see Marie's hand up. Marie, you may have the last word tonight. Over to you.
Again, Mike Dunlap.
Oh, yes, sorry, Mike.
So I think you've addressed a lot of the questions. I don't know if we're going to stop the speeding anytime soon, but I appreciate you taking the time and offering some solutions. Whether or not a speed bump, which I think personally, though, a couple of speed bumps would probably help much more than some of these little signs that the flex signs you might put in. But I guess to be determined. My question, or I guess I don't know if you can comment at all. There's the area beside the Queensway, or I guess adjacent across from Potter's Key. It's kind of all of our backyards where they clear cut to the area. I think maybe 5-6 years ago, they clear cut it 15 years ago. There's talk about development. Just can you comment at all if you know any applications or anything going on in that area, if you're familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I can. Just give me a sec. Let me see if I can pull up a map because that might help situate what we're talking about here for folks. Yeah. Okay, I found one. So I'm going to share my screen again. Again, this is for my website. Let's see if I can zoom in. This is going to get blurry because the map is not in high res. But the land you're referring to is there's kind of this big blue rectangle, and Carp Road runs right through the middle of that blue rectangle. And so there's a big area in gray that's immediately north of Potter's Key, and that's part of the city's urban boundaries. So for at least the last 10 years or so, it has been eligible for residential development. I'm actually not sure why it hasn't advanced quicker than it has. There are still no immediate plans around development of that parcel of land. But I would think within the next 3 to 5 years, we'll probably see the start of a community design and planning process. There would have to be some public consultation around what the design looks like and how the roads and parks and schools and so on are laid out. But it is slated for future residential development, but there's no immediate plans that have been proposed by the landowner at this point. The blue area above that has been earmarked for industrial and logistics, so like basically a business park and perhaps some warehouses to facilitate shipping and receiving. So kind of a light industrial business park area along the lands closest to the Queensway. Does that answer that, or is any other precision I can give there, Mike? Oh, I think you're on mute, Mike. Just
Sorry about that. The longer it takes for an application to be submitted is just fantastic for me.
okay. Okay. I'm not surprised to hear that. I mean, it is coming someday, but not in the next 2 or 3 years for sure. And if you're not already subscribed to my website, to my email newsletter, you can do so from my website. Anytime we do get development applications or public feedback opportunities, we post it to my website. Yes, we also post it to my email newsletter, which comes out once a week, and you can subscribe to that from my website as well. So we're almost at 8. And this was well timed because we have no more questions in the chat and no more hands up. So I want to say thank you to everyone who took their time this evening to take part in this. And thank you to Scott and Milad and Catherine. Catherine's been furiously taking notes in the background. And really appreciate all the information and all the feedback. And we'll be following up. And we'll share an update on my website about some of the outcomes from this and any next steps. So stay tuned and reach out if you have any other comments. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.